I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. Thank you for being here today. This is Ali Saleh with GIZ, and we're here today to talk about a very interesting topic for me personally, which is the next opportunity in impact investing. And I feel so lucky to discuss that with our great panelists today, Basil, Jack, Jade, Tamer, Karim. Thank you so much for coming today. And especially Jade, thank you so much for coming. I know that your trip to Egypt wasn't easy at all with everything going on right now in the UK.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for coming. So let's jump right into it, Karim. Why don't we start with you? I know that Changelabs and programs like Changelabs are more focusing on impact investing and social entrepreneurship. So why don't you tell us about what is impact investing, and why me as an investor, why should I care, and me as an investor and any stakeholder in the sector as well?
Sure. Thanks, Ali. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Karim Samra, and I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called Changelabs. And we run accelerators and learning programs, and we invest in what's called social enterprises or impact enterprises. And so, Ali, that's a great question. I mean, what is impact investing, right? I think all of you understand now, especially the people in the audience. I see that, there's a relatively young audience today, that you all understand that Mark Zuckerberg, or you know who Mark Zuckerberg is, you know who Elon Musk is, and you all understand that these are the new celebrities now. They're corporate leaders, right? They're not government personalities, they're not politicians anymore. The leaders of this era are corporations and corporate leaders. And that's a testament to the power that companies and the influence and the impact that corporations have on the world in which we live. They literally influence everything, from the chairs you're sitting on, to the clothes you're wearing, the glasses, to the air we're breathing in this space, are all influenced by corporations. And with great impact comes great responsibility. And so corporations have to have certain values that they live by and that they operate by. And impact investing is essentially, right, the confluence of financial profit-making corporations and values, right, and impact. So it's the idea that a company should have a view on the health of its consumers, on the effect of its products, on the way it generates electricity, right? Companies should have a view on that, and increasingly, Ali, we're seeing across the world today that companies are paying more and more attention to this, and of course, entrepreneurs are doing the same thing, and they're helping companies pay more attention to that. So so impact investing, again, is this idea that entrepreneurs, companies that are established, everyone should have a view on how their products and services are affecting their consumers and the environment. And it's a huge and growing movement, because not only are corporations kind of realizing this, individuals are demanding it. Yeah. Consumers are asking to buy products and services that are ethically sourced, that improve their health in addition to their livelihoods. So it's a market moving force as well, Ali.
Yeah, thank you, Karim, and that's really great, and that will take me to the next point. What type of organizations actually are involved in this sector, like Changelabs? Like, are you guys doing it alone in the market, or there are other?
So of course we're supported by a lot of organizations. Some of them are governments, right? The German government, like GIZ, for example, the Dutch government. The Dutch government, the Swiss government. So we have programs that are running today that are focused on impact entrepreneurship in Jordan with UNIDO, with Orange Telecommunications. We have programs in Lebanon with the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. We have programs here in Egypt with HIVOS, with GIZ, with other partners. So there's a lot of what's called multilateral organizations or semi-government organizations supporting this sector, which is great. There's private sector corporations obviously supporting this sector and looking for innovation in this space, which is also very exciting. And of course, there's foundations that have always done this kind of work, and there's also investors who are starting to look at this sector. And investors, led by university endowments, for example, in the West, in the United States and elsewhere. Those are some of the first people, the people responsible for managing the money of a university, the people responsible for managing the money of the social security system, right, in a country, whether it's a European country or a US country. These are the people that globally have led the charge towards impact investing, and then everybody else is now following. Because they realize that, like, they asked themselves, oh, we have this portfolio of investments, and they found when they did research that some of their investments are weapons companies, right? Defense contractors. As a university, do you want to be investing in a defense contractor that makes weapons? Probably not. And that's what started the whole thing. As a church endowment, as a religious organization who has a lot of savings, do you want to be investing in weapons and chemicals that are destroying the environment? That makes no sense as a religious organization. It conflicts with your values, right? And so those are the initial organizations that started this movement. It's now according to JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, it's a $600 billion global market now, but it started there.
Perfect. Thank you, Karim. And I think also the next $1 trillion opportunity will come out of the impact space. I was getting there later in the panel. So Jade, we covered the definition of the impact investing. Why don't you tell us the difference between impact investing and traditional investing? And since you guys are operating in Africa, how big is, from your perspective, how big is the opportunity right now in Africa?
Sure. Traditional investors are in Aston Martins. That's how you can recognize them. Everyone else is in a Tesla. Essentially, when we talk about essentially kind of like impact investing, it's traditionally been looked at as non-commercial returns. It's traditionally been looked at as the idea that you're going to essentially privilege the doing of good over the earning of returns. That is beginning to actually collapse, because what we're starting to see is the evolution of markets towards the idea that in order to actually earn the price that you want to charge me, you have to also at least not do any harm. And more than that, you have to do good. You have to be kind of aware of what is happening inside of the environment. You have to be aware of all the elements that Karim talked about. And so essentially impact investing was kind of all about how do we tie commercial returns to almost a list of essentially KPIs around environments or around any of these larger scale things. Now we're starting to see, and this is what we try and actually do at Ambo, companies with impact actually kind of integrated into the core of what they do. So we kind of like invested in a EV company in Kenya. And the core of that is to actually change in a commercially viable way how people are moving, what transportation looks like, in order to actually deliver cheaper pricing and positive environmental impact. And so that's the direction, I think, of impact investing, is actually this idea and this recognition that you can have commercial return if you are innovative enough. And that's where VC comes in, right? It's, can we spot the technologies that are going to change and disrupt the actual cost curves in a way that is going to allow us to also do good for the environment? And that's what we try and look at Ambo as well. To give an example, cold chain. There's a huge issue within Africa, and this kind of takes me to the Africa point. Cold chain infrastructure inside of Africa is extremely costly if it's accessible at all. But there are entrepreneurs on the ground who, because of the constraints that exist kind of like around them, have realized that there's also an opportunity. Taking relatively cheap, commodified inputs and actually translating those into an innovation that perhaps is not essentially going to get you kind of like a PhD at kind of MIT, but that is going to actually be scalable all across an environment where the capacity to pay is very low. And so to me, the opportunity that you see on the continent is actually a global opportunity. If we want to address the challenge of climate change, it's going to come out of Africa, because the innovators have to operate under a huge constraint. That means that the actual technologies that they actually develop are going to be extremely competitive globally and easier to adopt. And so, yeah, that's kind of the opportunity that we see, and we think it's a pretty big one.
Perfect, perfect. And speaking of the trends and opportunities in this sector, what are the most promising sectors in the impact in space industry and right now, and who's leading right now on this sector?
Yeah, there's actually quite a lot of extraordinary organizations. Acumen is an organization that's actually extremely well known. You essentially kind of like have the proliferation of more and more actors who are starting to look at how do we kind of invest to ensure the kind of energy transition, or in order to actually transform those things. What we are particularly excited about, particularly in Africa, is around essentially 3 core areas. One is around how do we deal with the consequences of a continent whose entire population is going to grow extremely rapidly in a way that's not going to destroy the environment any more than it already is, right? And so food systems, right, agriculture, logistics, mobility, those kinds of things are areas that we look at, because we see also inside of those, right, these kinds of nascent innovations that change the actual cost profile of a lot of those industries. The other area is around waste, food waste, energy waste, all kinds of other stuff. What kinds of technologies can we tap into that will allow us to be more efficient? So smart cities, infrastructure, that kind of stuff, in a way that is going to kind of change once again, the economics of doing good, right? And then essentially the last one is essentially around the community and kind of the people that we see, right? If the world gets to a 3-degree warmer world, it's going to have significant health consequences, going to have significant areas that currently on the continent, our communities are not adapted for and not prepared for. And we have to invest in the kinds of technologies that's going to be able to actually deliver the care they need, deliver the elements they need in a way that is kind of aware of what's happening inside the climate, and is affordable and accessible.
So, thank you so much, Jay. That was really amazing. So, Basil, let's take that from the government and public perspective. So we know that a lot of governments and regulators are working right now to issue working on regulations to support the startup ecosystem, and to cope up with how dynamic is this sector. So, like for example, the fintech sector. So, in your opinion, how governments and central banks are cooperating with the fintech companies and startups in general on alternative financing and for SMEs?
Yeah, thank you for that, and appreciate the opportunity to talk about how you implement this, because I think everybody talks a lot about the why and how this is important to our future. We talk a lot about the what and the how, and that's all the SDG goals and impact, and you hear lots of confusing terms in the industry. But ultimately, really, it's a question of what to do. What does that mean for a startup sitting here today? What does that mean for an investor, right? And understanding that is critically important. Just specifically to your questions, I think governments are one source of funding. I think there are many sources already mentioned earlier. And everyone is coming to the table now saying, I don't want you just to put money to work in businesses, but I also want certain objectives met. My preferred framework is the SDG one. I think the UN SDGs are pretty comprehensive, of which financial inclusion, health inclusion, and others are very top, let's say, in government minds. And what you're seeing is the kind of the basic questions around how many people does this business, this new idea, fintech, reach in terms of end users that are not banked, for example, or how many of them are you bringing into the system of giving them financial wellness or financial education, and how are you, raising the kind of the bottom 15, 20% of society into the middle class, if that makes sense. And I guess the concept is that it used to be a discussion that was mostly about, why is this important and we need to do this, with what I would call very fluffy, concepts. It's no longer that. Now targets are being set, right? Now numbers are being put down. Dangerous, and I can give you the argument on the other side, when managers and investors start to focus just on those types of goals, you don't necessarily optimize for financial returns, but that, in my mind, is the challenge and the opportunity, right? Because it is challenging to kind of find the regression curve, I guess, of optimization between those two elements. But ultimately, what you want to do is, how can you put money to work in companies and startups that have the biggest reach in financial inclusion, as one example, or in improving the environment, or starving off what seems inevitable now of global warming and so on. And I think it's an interesting and more fulfilling mission for a manager, in my mind, investing money, to actually think through that, as opposed to, I just like the company and I like the business model and let's invest. But it comes with a lot more, pontification is probably the way to put it.
Thanks, Basil. So that was great, but I was just curious. So we talked about central banks and governments and stuff, but how do you think how commercial banks are reacting to that? Are they joining the trend by supporting central banks and public policies, or they will just?
Corporations are self-interested, right? Like any organization in the world, their self-interest lies in management wanting to maximize shareholder returns. And so honestly, the answer is, you have to look at how younger generation now are banking, right? And how and the choices that they get to make, and on a mobile phone, how you easily or not, for that matter, switch between one or the other. They're voting with their own, buttons, I guess, with their own thumb
QR codes
on the phone. So I guess the answer to your question is, it's not how the corporations or banks in per se are reacting, it's what are consumers demanding. And you only have to look today to the streets, to the younger population, for those of you who love social media and want to follow the influencers and the youngsters who are kind of online. Their message is pretty clear on that they want their companies and institutions to do better. I think the word movement was used. I think that's a strong word. I think there's still I think it's momentum right now that we have. I think movement in some countries has become huge, Northern Europe in particular, certain parts of the United States, etc., certain parts of Asia. But I do think we are entering a phase in which it will become imperative for banks to understand that they're not just a money deposit system, but that they have a part to play in the services that they provide and how that impact happens. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, whether they like it or not, they're going there anyway.
So yeah, that's great, and let's take it from the other side. So we always hear that big money moves slowly, and dealing with DFIs is not getting any easier every day with the constant change in regulations and policies. So do you guys, specifically as a VC and Global Ventures and specifically, do you find any problems right now mobilizing capital or finding the proper deals in the impact sector, or it's not getting challenging?
Well, I think if I understand the question correctly, there's one, if you look at it from an ESG lens, which is kind of environmental, societal governance, governance is probably the one that's the biggest headache, if that's the question, because it's not about solving for an optimal, but it's solving for an ever-changing landscape. Again, going back to fintech or health tech for that matter, or the healthcare sector, there is new regulations, new laws, privacy, residency, that's just on the data side, protection, consumer protection, and all sorts of things happening. And so I think if you're a startup entering particular segments, but probably applies across the board, you have to be pretty astute and pretty nimble in how you evolve against those things. So regulator is your friend and the regulator is your enemy, and you have to kind of build the relationship with them that you're very communicative, very open. I think regulators have shown that they can be very open and also communicating. Egypt especially has seen tremendous progress with the openness of communication, but it's a two-way street, right? You have to keep kind of communicating back, push the envelope, but respect the boundaries as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Basil. So now, Jack, we discussed that from the public perspective. Let's take it from the LP's perspective. So you guys now are supporting a lot of fund managers in the MENA and Africa, and you're exploring the market. So what is your experience so far in Africa, and do you guys have any plans to enter the Egyptian market anytime soon?
Yeah, so I think a couple things to follow up on that. One is we've entered the Egyptian market indirectly here through Global Ventures, and have been extremely excited to work with them on some of these issues around impact and ESG, but also more broadly about what they've been building with the firm. And we will continue to look more closely at Egypt and explore both managers and direct investments. And so that's a short answer to your question on that one.
Perfect. So tell us more about Capria's mission in general and how you guys are supporting fund managers in Africa.
Yeah. So our focus is really to come in as partners with fund managers and support them across all the various aspects of fund management. So impact and ESG is one component. And from our standpoint, ESG is really about risk mitigation, right? On environmental, social, and governance side, you're managing risk. And so we differentiate and distinguish between ESG and impact. I think there's a lot of confusion when you use the term impact investing because there's a lot of definitions. And so for us, impact really gets at the intentionality behind what's being built, how it's being built, who it's serving, how it's serving them. And so our framework for that is really to break it down, at least when evaluating funds, which is slightly different than direct investments. At the fund level, we're looking at the overall status of the ecosystem in which the fund manager is operating, the availability of capital, and whether or not that's catalytic or additional to something that where there's already a plethora of capital in the market. And then ultimately, who are or is there that intentionality in terms of the consumers, the customers, and the recipients of services or products? And then we break that down in a whole slew of different ways.
Perfect. I'm looking forward to work for you to working more with fund managers in the MENA. We have very great potential fund managers, so we can talk about that in the backstage. So my other question to you, Jack, will be: how do you guys measure impact? You made measure the impact you made through Capria compared to the pre-COVID times, and how do you measure that impact? Oh, sorry. How did things change for you since the start of the pandemic, and how do you measure the impact comparing to the pre-COVID times?
Yeah, from an impact perspective, I wouldn't say we've changed how we look at measuring our impact. I think the framework that I just outlined at the fund level is what we've been developing and iterating on over time. When we're looking at individual companies, we also have, I believe it's somewhere between 12 to 15 different things that we're looking at with different weightings applied, and essentially produce a score on level of impact when we're evaluating that opportunity. COVID hasn't influenced how we've adapted from the standpoint of the impact measurement side of things, but it certainly has changed how we evaluate investment opportunities more broadly in terms of how well prepared they are to essentially navigate uncertain times and potentially have to survive various lockdown periods and things like that.
Perfect. Can you please elaborate more on how do you foster innovations in your line of business? Like you mentioned, there's some sort of criteria. Can you give us,
Well, so at the fund level, one of the conversations we have with managers is, it's great to talk about impact. Everyone seems to be talking about it now, right? You have the largest asset manager in the world with BlackRock coming out and saying that maximizing shareholder value is no longer enough. And there's been, various degrees of criticism around that. And I think that's also what led to what's been leading to some of the confusion around it. But ultimately, when we're engaging with funds, I think some of the funds that we've seen don't identify as impact investment firms per se, but there's a substantial amount of impact that they're creating through their investments in health tech or education tech or climate, and so we look at the continuum of their the investment process and really work with them to establish, what their is, what their thesis is, and then how does that actually get infused within the various components of the investment process from start to finish? So from initial screen to the investment decision-making process, all the way through to portfolio management.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jack. So now, Tamer, now we know that you guys in Shuruk working on a lot of exciting stuff right now. So I have two questions for you actually here. The first one, please tell us more about your plans in Shuruk Partners in supporting the startup ecosystem in the region in general now. And the second one would be, is making an impact limited to equities, or you can make an impact like in other ways?
To give you some context, my name is Tamer Aizer. I'm a partner at Shuruk Partners. Shuruk Partners is a Abu Dhabi-based venture capital fund investing across the entire region. Our core thesis as Shuruk Partners is to be founders partners. That's why we're called Shuruk Partners, because we want to be there for our founders. We are trying to run as distributed a team as possible to be truly present in the core markets in which we want to invest. And that's why I'm here in Egypt, my partner Shane is in Saudi Arabia, and my partner Mahmoud is in Abu Dhabi. We want to be super focused on being present for our founders, expanding our footprint, so we can really have a blended value add from a local and regional perspective to support our portfolio companies. In terms of impacts being sort of equity-based, I think if you take a few steps back to what Karim was saying around university endowments and sort of church endowments, and what Jack was saying about the maximizing shareholder value, this is all driven by the common denominator, right? The philosophical concept of democracy is that those who are chosen to manage have to respond to those who have chosen them to manage, right? And we're seeing the definitions of everything change. The definition of shareholder value change, the definition of impact change, the definition of what it means to have a positive footprint change. So we started off with some people at a university campus thinking that they want their money to be invested consciously. So no weapons, no tobacco, maybe no oil and gas. And then that evolved to impact. And then you see that the traditional private capital and what was initially sort of a little bit further away, impact, are slowly converging and slowly evolving, right? So private capital reacted with ESG, right? But so what's next, right? Maybe conscious investing, right? And I remember at a panel once, a colleague of mine from Village Capital described this really, really well, right? So what does it mean to be more conscious? Right? It means that as an impact investor, sometimes I think about, okay, so there's a woman in a village in Africa who needs to walk 4 kilometers every day to get water, right? So I get the water to her. That's impact. But actually, that's the woman's break from the household. So I eliminated something very, very important for the woman. So being conscious about how I invest and how I deliver my impact is the way forward to think about impact. So as this whole space evolves and the definition of adding shareholder value or increasing shareholder value changes to have more impact-oriented preferences, we as those quote-unquote elected to manage are expected to change and adapt to what our common denominator wants, which is better, more conscious, more impactful investment.
Perfect. Tamer, we also we always hear in the impact investing or social entrepreneurship sector that charity is not enough. Well, if charity, and we push back and say, well, if charity is not enough, then what is? So that's why we've heard that investing to make an impact doesn't mean necessarily lower returns. Do you agree with that, or do you have any other opinion?
It's the same argument I just made for how we invest. The definitions of everything are changing because our common denominator, the people who we represent, the people who we report to, the people whose expectations we manage, are changing. We, as fund managers or as elected government officials, are seeing our common denominator, the people, wanting us to do things differently. So the idea and the definition of returns is also changing. Right? We are looking more at blended returns. We know that, as Bassel said, governance is sort of very straightforward. It's been researched to death that good governance increases returns by about 20%. Right? So really easy case to make. All right? And then we are also starting to see social metrics as part of ESG being very clearly and directly correlated to better returns, because the consumers, the end users, the investors, the lowest common denominator, I don't mean lowest, that's kind of rude, but the common denominator, I've been so conscious not to say lowest, but I did it anyway. The common denominator wants us to do better. Better for them, better for our countries, better for our economies, and better for everybody else in our communities. So the definitions of everything are changing. And what we once perceived as really far out there and really far left is very quickly becoming part of the mainstream.
Perfect. So,
can I just add a quick thing
course,
over here?
Please.
Let's be very careful putting the word charity in with impact investing, right? And I know that's not what the intention of the question was, but the biggest worry is somehow this turns out to be an optional, or people think of it as somehow not necessary, or I get to choose.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, I think we're getting to beyond the phase right now where investing is conscious. To Tamer's point, and what the panelists have said in terms of, no, we're being asked to specifically think through exactly how this money or this business will change the dimensions of water being brought versus water being taken, right? And the example that was given. So this isn't charity. And as a manager, I don't see it as charity. I see it as a responsibility that adds actually a nice level of complexity, but also a nice level of challenge to the job.
I didn't mean it that way, really, but yeah, of course. So I think we ran out of time, guys, but that was really great. Thank you so much. Again, I was so pleased to have the chance to discuss this topic with you today. I think we covered the public and private sector perspectives, and I think that was quite comprehensive. So thank you again so much for all of our panelists for taking the time for joining us today, and thanks everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed the panel, and see you in the next one. Thank you so much.